Hey friends, Peggy Hall back with you from thehealthyamerican.org, streaming live, and today is September 9th, 2025. Over the last several days, I've done live streams and also just broadcast for you about the new controversies that are cropping up. They're probably not new controversies, but they are getting into prime time. And that's probably good news when it comes to helping people understand all of the harms that are associated with these products. Now, before we dive into today's video, which is just really a big picture about the Department of Homeland Security. They're having a Senate hearing today about vaccines. I'm going to share with you in just a moment what they're really doing. But before I do that, I do need to address a couple of little outstanding things related to my previous videos. I emailed out a Substack today. That's a free blog. It is at peggyhall.substack.com. This is a way for you to get my written comments. And often people will read the Substack. They don't watch the video, so they really have a portion of my commentary. But what happened is I broke down Trump's response to DeSantis and the Surgeon General of Florida, Latipo, saying that they were going to do away with vaccine mandates in public schools. And many people were applauding that. And of course, many people were speaking out against that, misinterpreting those comments as to say that they were going to just do away with vaccines altogether. I don't know if people really thought that, but that was the response that DeSantis and Latipo, that's something that they were responding to. So people asked Trump what he thought about Florida saying that there should be no more vaccine mandates. And Trump said that there are vaccines that work and that they are safe, and that it would be, you have to be very careful to make sure to tell someone not to get a vaccine, because if they might catch it and they might endanger someone else with it, whatever the heck it is. And by the way, if the other person is vaccinated against it, then why are they worried about whether someone else has it? But more than one person emailed me a link to, okay, that's my Sandy, go to bed. She's getting all riled up also. People emailed me a link to Trump's Truth Social, I guess it was a little video where someone else was saying that these products are very deadly. Now, here's the issue. Why didn't Trump say these things when he was asked in the Oval Office? And playing a video of what someone else is saying about these products is certainly not the same as Trump saying it. So I just wanted to address that, because people are saying, see, Peggy, see, look what Trump did. He posted this on Truth Social. Well, that is not something that goes into like the federal government record. I mean, that's a social media site. And his posting without any commentary or very little commentary, someone else's video, doesn't really implicate him in anything. So he should have a press concert, as I call them, because they are performances, and set the record straight if he really believes that these things are harmful. I don't want to hear the argument about, well, that would be political suicide. Oh, so you're okay with millions of children's lives being at risk because you don't want to speak the truth? Well, let me tell you about another dog and pony show today. As you know, I do give my condolences and my apologies to dogs and ponies. I'm going to share my screen, and this actually is what came from YouTube. And I was not watching, but I was watching a little bit when I was out and about and able to sit down and watch. And then I had quite a long drive today, so I was listening to the Senate hearing. It went on for well over 3 hours, so I was not able to listen to the entire thing. However, what we're going to talk about is the big picture, not all the specific details. You can watch the 3 hours if you want to. I will pull out a couple of things that are painting this bigger commentary that I have for you. So let me share my screen. And this was on YouTube prior to the hearing. So this is from the Committee on Homeland Security. I said it was the Department of Homeland Security, but basically they are the Committee on Homeland Security in the Senate, and that is headed up with Chairman Ron Johnson. You may know that name because Ron Johnson has held several hearings on these vaccines. And let me ask you, what has come of it? Have they gotten rid of them? That would be a big NO. But here is the smoking gun. So take a look at this It is actually titled, the title of the hearing is How the Corruption of Science Has Impacted Public Perception and Policies Regarding Vaccines. Let's let this soak in for a moment, because this is extremely important in terms of my broadcast, because they are, let's break it down. How the corruption of science. All right. Right away, the Senate under Ron Johnson, the Senate Committee for Homeland Security, Ron Johnson is someone that is known in the health freedom movement as he's on our side. He's like a multi-millionaire. Do I have how much? Yeah. In 2018, his net worth was around $40 million. Of course, they have to round it out to 39 because, you know, those numbers are quite significant to these individuals. I can't say that was put there as some kind of symbolism for those in the know to understand, but let's just say this man is quite wealthy. Hey, I hope everybody's wealthy. But the point is, he's a senator. Where did he get this money? Don't know if it came from the pharmaceutical companies or not. But what I do know is the name of this hearing that he was in charge of starts out by saying, how the corruption of science. So here's what we're looking at. They have a perfect, by they, I mean the ones that want to grab those of us that didn't fall for the hogwash the first time around. They knew that they couldn't get everyone to go with the edicts and the corruption and the oppression and the tyranny that the government tried to inflict upon us in the beginning. So there were a bunch of us that kind of fell through their trap. And now they want to get the rest of us who fell through the trap by saying, well, you know what? It was just that the science was corrupted. We didn't have the right science. And it wasn't really the fault of Fauci or anyone else. The science was corrupted. And when you listen to the Senate hearing, you are going to hear that again and again and again, the conflicting and confusing nature of the information and the studies, and all of that is done intentionally. I'm going to break that down for you in just a moment. So, how the corruption of science has impacted public perception. What is public perception? The way we see things. So they're saying that because the science was corrupted, that people are not seeing the truth about these products that should be very helpful and beneficial. That's the way I see it, friends. It wasn't entitled the harms and deadly nature of these injectable products and why we should get rid of them. That would have been a good name. No, but people don't even look at the title. They just are catching little snippets here on social media or on YouTube, and they are not bothering to actually look at the entire thing. So as I say, this is Ron Johnson, and he has been propped up somewhat as, oh, he's on our side, just like people think Bob is on their side. They don't realize that he is not who they think he is. So let's go back to 2020. And then I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm going to lump the bad and the ugly together in my analysis of today's hearing. Back in 2020, Ron Johnson, he was also the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee. He held a hearing on outpatient treatment for those who had cooties. Just a quick reminder, there are no new diseases, friends. There's nothing new under the sun. God himself said so. There's nothing new under the sun. Our body didn't suddenly change and new diseases appear. Cooties is a name that was given to a list of symptoms that we used to call the flu. And there are many people that can speak about how the flu might even be good for you in some cases because you're detoxing the body. Just like when you sneeze, your body's trying to eliminate something. When you have a rash, it's a response to some kind of allergy your body's trying to eliminate. When you have diarrhea, your body's trying to eliminate it. A fever, your body's trying to burn something up. So some would say that having a flu, if we want to call it that, is something that people go through. So let's just establish from the beginning that these things like cooties have never been proven to exist. I would like to thank Christine Massey, who has done a ton of work along with others who have supported her in requesting through the Freedom of Information Act, the actual data, the studies, or just even the basis for calling for this when it doesn't even exist. Do people get sick? Yes, they do. If you'd like to know why or how, I've got videos on this channel about why people get sick. There are so many reasons. There are reasons people don't get sick. I've been around a lot of people that are sick and I didn't catch anything. So I just want to clear the air, because sometimes when I talk about cooties, people say, aha, you believe that it exists. I don't know where they get that. So back to Ron Johnson. He held multiple hearings in the first year of all the cooties hogwash to scrutinize the federal health agencies. Well, friends, what came out of that? A big zero. Nothing came out of it other than to give hopium. I like that phrase. I didn't coin it. Hopium, right? The hope that keeps people hooked. Just let the man work, follow the plan, trust the plan. It's all going on behind scenes. It's 3D chess, 5D chess. Nothing ever happened with Ron Johnson, other than a lot of people getting a lot of airtime and probably applause and maybe some donations here or there, because they went and spoke to Ron Johnson at his hearings. Nothing happened. In 2022, he had an informal panel of doctors and scientists, I'm just reading my notes here, who had been criticized for spreading the misinformation about the cooties. And it was called COVID-19, a second opinion. And it was supposed to question the alternative perspectives on all of the hogwash. What came out of that? A big zero, nothing, nada, zilch. So now here we are in 2025. Back in May, just a few months ago, there was another hearing, and that was all about how health officials downplayed and hid myocarditis and other adverse events associated with those shots. I definitely applaud and I said there's good, bad, and ugly. The good is having these conversations in the public eye. I think that's amazing. There are some downsides, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So yes, let's talk about these adverse reactions and events, but let's not pin it on, oh, it was a bad batch. It's just the people that got that batch. Oh, you're out of luck. Or, well, they were immunocompromised, so they couldn't handle it very well. Yeah, I don't want to fall into all of those justifications as well. So in July of this year, Ron Johnson had yet another hearing. Now, I wouldn't say it was to mollify and pacify those of us that fell through and didn't get captured in the first round of the hogwash. But I would say that because that's what I believe is happening. So in July, he had another Senate hearing to examine the voices of those injured by the jabs. I think that's very important. I'm not covering that on this video. I just was doing a little research to find out how many hearings he had previously, because I know this wasn't the first one. And everybody gets all excited that there's going to be a Senate hearing about the shots. But friends, it's been going on for years and nothing of note has happened. So a couple of days ago, and I did cover this on my channel, there was a Senate Finance Committee. And again, Ron Johnson was in that hearing, and they had sort of a back and forth about Bob's approach to these jabs. And I covered that in great detail. I believe that these are scripted performances. When you look at today's hearing, I will say that the senators' comportment was much better. Their behavior was much more aligned with what you would think how a senator would behave, instead of these crazy events that we saw recently where they're literally trying to act outraged to garner sympathy for Bob, so that people will say, well, Bob's just being bullied. He can't stand up. He's compromised. They have something on him. Friends, he's a Kennedy. There's nothing that they could have on him that is worse than what his entire family has done. And they're a bunch of liars and cheaters and murderers, and don't just trust me for it. I mean, them's the facts, friends. I did an entire video for you on that. You can do your research on it as well. The Kennedy name, kind of like mRNA, it's tainted. These manufacturers don't want to be associated with the mRNA. These senators and doctors and Kennedy doesn't want to be associated with the mRNA. A lot of people don't want to be associated with the Kennedys. I mean, unbelievable corruption going back a long, long time. So I believe that that Senate hearing was to garner sympathy for Bob so people could say, look at, he's under so much pressure. He's in on it with them, friends. So I could not find anything of note in terms of what actions Ron Johnson has taken, other than to get press, other than to mollify and pacify people that are saying, well, at least they're talking about it in the Senate. So today, here's what happened. It was a hearing about how the corruption of science has impacted public perception and policies regarding vaccines. And what they're not saying is we need to fix that so that people will start trusting that again. That's what Bob has been saying all along. So Aaron Siri, who is an attorney, and he has done work for Bob. He has done work for Children's Health Defense. And he was under scrutiny by me and others when I did a video questioning this model legislation that he has proposed and has actually even gotten in the front door on some state legislatures called improving vaccine confidence. And then they said, oh, no, Peggy, you're far too stupid to understand. This bill isn't about vaccine confidence. They're just calling it that. And when I broke it down, that's exactly what it was about. It was about improving the public's perception about vaccines. So I would really like to think that Aaron Siri is trustworthy, is someone that actually has the best interest of children at heart. But I do question his incessant drumming of these infectious diseases and gain of function. And friends, all of those things are smokescreens. None of that has been proven. And there was another fellow, Toby Rogers from the Brownstone Institute. I'm a little skeptical about this institute, which was started in 2021 and suddenly has about $3 million of operating expenses. And they have people like Toby Rogers, who is a political economist. I think he's American, but he went to school in Australia. I don't know if he lives there or not, but it's very sad because he has a story about someone close to him that is autistic. And he dedicated his entire PhD thesis to autism. So I would hope that he also, I take Toby Rogers to be very sincere, yet he has been carried off with this idea of gain of function and some kind of invisible pathogenic particle was released and I guess was running out of the clinic in China. I mean, how exactly does that happen? How is something released? So I think that he needs more research in that area. He spoke today. He was very compelling. He spoke from the heart. And again, I'm not going to be playing clips of that. I'm just giving you a bigger picture as to what I think is going on. And then there was also another doctor in charge of epidemiology from Stanford. And they had these three individuals kind of playing off each other as the senators were asking questions. Ron Johnson was more sympathetic. And he came to the aid of Aaron Siri a few times when Ari stumbled and couldn't answer the question, including one that was this. Aaron is in possession, he says, of a study done by prominent doctors showing the harms. I'm summarizing at a very high level, or at a very general level, summarizing the harms of these shots. Yet it was never published and it was never released. It was never even mentioned until today. Another senator grilled him politely and said, well, what do you mean it wasn't released until today? How could you have withheld this information that you've had for years or for a long period of time while people are concerned about these harms? How is it that you could never have it released? Was it ever published? And Aaron Siri starts to kind of stumble and say, well, no, the doctors who authored this didn't want to lose their jobs. They didn't want their names to be associated with this information. What? You got to be kidding me. So Ron Johnson sort of leapt to his defense and said, "Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, I asked him to bring that study today. It wasn't going to be published." And they started hemming and hawing. And it left me with the question, if you had information that you knew was going to save millions of lives, including innocent children's lives, you're an adult, go do what you want, you can research and all that. Children and animals that are being harmed in the meantime with these testing protocols, you are going to withhold that information because you're afraid that you're going to lose your job. Well, those are people of very little integrity, if you ask me. So I couldn't really get a read on whether or not that was even accurate because we're never going to see it. They haven't released it. It's never been published. So Ron Johnson comes across as very sympathetic to those like Aaron Siri and like Toby Rogers, this professor, who are speaking out against these forced requirements for people to get the jabs. And in Toby Rogers' case, in terms of the very clear association between these jabs and autism. So that's the good. The good is that this is all out in the open. This is in the public view. In fact, I made a couple of notes here because it's kind of like prime time now. So definitely what is good, the debates are happening frequently. More and more people are tuning in. More and more people are raising questions about these products. So I think that's good. I think it's great that these conversations are happening. The bad and the ugly is that nothing really seems to come of it. Ron Johnson has been doing this since 2020, 2021, 22, 23. This is 6 years now that he's been having these hearings and the shots are still available. Another part of the good is that information is coming out about the links between all of these jabs and the rise in autism that was mentioned many times in this hearing. I applaud that. The bad is that we are hearing that it's processed food and red dye and probably seed oils and pesticides, and probably all of those have some type of implication in autism. But you know and I know that that didn't cause that incredible rise over the years, and that rise is specifically correlated to the number of cocktails that children get. So that's good. But the bad is that speaking out against these jabs and having it be done in this political forum, in a governmental hearing, it reinforces the wrong concept or perspective that the government should have anything to do with this anyway. Now, if the FDA wants to approve these things because they're drugs, approve them, slap on your approval number, your biologic number for authorization, and let it go. But why should the government? I really want a sincere answer to this question. Why does this have anything to do with the government at all? And why do our tax dollars go to these pharmaceutical companies for them to develop their products? I didn't vote for that. I'm not in favor of that. I showed you yesterday that there was about a $30 billion investment of your money and mine into the pharmaceutical companies to create the Cooties cocktails. Those pharmaceutical companies got hundreds of billions of dollars in profits. Shouldn't we get some of that profit sharing? I'm sincere. And maybe they do. Maybe that's why Ron Johnson is a $40 million millionaire. Maybe they do get some profit sharing. I certainly didn't. But if our tax dollars went to these companies and then they benefited and profited off that money, at least put the money back into the federal government and back to us. Where's Elon Musk when you need him? I'd like to see him doge that. So again, the bad. Ron Johnson has been doing this for years and nothing of note has come from it. Speaking out against these, even Toby Rogers, even Aaron Siri and the others that they had, it reinforces the notion that somehow there is an invisible, scary, life-threatening, contagious pathogen floating out there that you and I could catch from our friend, our neighbor, a teacher, the grocery store clerk. Unless, of course, we're self-suffocating, have proven that we're not sick by taking the nasal swab assault, or have become a human pincushion. Let me remind you, you don't need to prove that you're not sick. And if any of you are still fighting, maybe at your nursing school or something, because they want you to prove that you're healthy, you don't have to prove anything. In fact, it's up to them to prove that you're not. And besides, there's no law against being sick, so you're not violating any law. So I don't care for the fact that in these primetime discussions, people are being exposed to this wrong concept of the theory of contagion, because it is a theory, and the theory of virology, which has never been proven. So every time they're talking about the number of people that got cooties prior to the jab being available and the number of people that got it later, all of that reinforces this notion that there's something to be afraid of, that there's this contagious disease that just popped up out of nowhere. So you should be afraid, very, very afraid. Now, more of the bad and the ugly. There was so much conflicting and confusing data that was presented in the hearing today, and I believe that was done intentionally. You had people that couldn't answer the questions. They had data that didn't match up with someone else's, and that is done for a purpose. Confusion to confuse people, offering conflicting information so you can't really follow along. This is a well-known strategy of mind manipulation. Friends, I know that you can see it clearly. Now, another bad is that people are going to say, fantastic, Ron Johnson is having a hearing and we're going to get all this information out. And Aaron Series spoke about it, and Toby Rogers, and they're standing up for we the people. But the bad is people think that something is going to come out of this, so they're going to be complacent. They're going to say, no, they're handling it. It's all getting out there now. Well, no, it's still up to you individually to turn these things down. And I've mentioned this website before. It's called physiciansforinformedconsent.org. They also believe in contagious diseases. However, giving you a caveat, they've got tons of free information that you can download with all of the harms associated with these jabs. It's done in a very clinical manner, so you can print that out, pass it out to people that you know. Maybe you know a grandparent or a parent, and you want them to be educated in a non-emotional way, so you can give them this information. Physiciansforinformedconsent.org. So I want to know exactly what is going to happen from this hearing. Why doesn't someone stand up and say, we're just wasting our time here? We've had these hearings forever. Yes, 6 years is forever. And by the way, the government has no authority to be involved in this whatsoever. If I were giving testimony at that hearing, that's exactly what I would say. Why is this why are you making this your business? And what does this have to do with the Department of Homeland Security? I also don't care for that, making it appear as though some sort of disease or illness has anything to do with national security. Friends, that was the justification that they used to shut everything down under Trump back in 2020. In fact, it wasn't under it. Let me restate that. Trump was in office when the governors shut down their states. The federal government has no authority to close any state whatsoever. It was each governor in each state making that choice. And unfortunately, California was the first state to shut down and the last state to reopen. Some would say they still are not reopened, because as of today, in Northern California, around the San Francisco area, they are still calling for people to self-suffocate, and they are really coming down hard in the medical facilities. So that's why I loved hearing DeSantis say that no one should have their medical care withheld just because they're not participating in all of that hogwash. I'm sure he used the word hogwash. So my question is for Ron Johnson, Senator. You've been holding these hearings for several years and nothing has come of it. Or let me ask you, what has come of it specifically? And I'll just keep waiting. What products have been pulled off the market? What warnings have been given to Americans? And what justification do you have for even saying that the government has any say or authority in telling you to be injected anyway? So I got to hand it to you. They are doing a great job. They're doing a great job of deflecting the real issue, distracting people who are gullible and easily swayed by saying, Aaron Series is going to stand up for us. Dig a little deeper, friends. Here's what they're deflecting and distracting us from: the fact that there are no new diseases. The body hasn't suddenly changed. There's nothing new under the sun. It's the same symptoms, just under a different title. I've done videos on this channel as well. I showed you what the flu symptoms are, what bird flu symptoms are, and what the cootie symptoms are, and they're exactly the same. And you know, because people are onto it, now the CDC had to come up with new symptoms like, oh, pink eye is now a part of cooties. Oh, you got a sore elbow? You probably have cooties. I mean, you gotta hand it to them. They're very creative. But the problem is these public serpents, yeah, and I throw the CDC into that, absolutely. They prey on people's fears. Fear of illness, fear of getting sick, fear of dying. Many people are deathly afraid of that. So they plant these ideas in people's minds. And the people will start to believe it. They'll even see it. They literally will feel and experience these symptoms themselves. I'm sure you've heard of that. There's something called psychosomatic illness where you make yourself sick. You know, my mom was an RN. She worked in the emergency room her entire career. She was not in favor of the mainstream medical merry-go-round, prescriptions for life and that kind of thing. She was in trauma medicine. So if someone had a car accident, you stitched them up, you made them feel better, sent them on their way, set their broken leg and so forth. So she was very skeptical about all of these things. And I remember she had one of her nursing books from years ago, and I love to read and I love to learn. And I was thumbing through that nursing book, and there was a chapter about psychosomatic illness. And there was a woman who was a mother. She was probably in her mid 40s, and she was getting better for whatever reason. I don't know why she was in the hospital, but she was getting better. And the doctors said, after, back in the day, you stayed in the hospital a lot longer than you do these days. So she probably had been in the hospital, I'm just going to say a couple of weeks, meaning she didn't have to do, and this is like in the 1930s, she didn't have to. My mom was not in nursing school in the 1930s. The textbook was written, and this was a story from the 1930s. She didn't have to do the housework. She didn't have to do the cooking. She didn't have to take care of the children. She didn't have to run the household. She basically, although she was in the hospital recovering, she had a break from all of those family duties. When the doctor said to her that she was going to be released, she had a relapse. Now, the interesting thing is relapses happen, absolutely, but the doctors could not pinpoint anything physically that was that could have been causing that. I'm sure that you yourself might have gotten sick after a period of trauma, of stress, of hardship in your life. You probably know someone that might have gotten sick after they started a new job and they just couldn't stomach going to that job, and they literally made themselves sick. And so they couldn't do it. I know someone who told me that they had a friend that was going to have a visit with them, flying from out of state. And that night before they were going to fly out for this long-awaited reunion, the person ended up in the emergency room with some sort of appendicitis attack. I'm not saying it couldn't have been a coincidence, but often these things will happen, and people, we even have the expression, oh, that makes me sick, or he made himself sick over it. So yes, I believe, just with my own life experience, that it's likely a number of people who went to the emergency room because they couldn't breathe, and they started having all those symptoms that were being drummed into their brain, watching the news every night because they were told to stay home. They probably started to feel that they couldn't breathe, and they had a little sore throat, and they were getting a fever, and maybe they even were. Maybe they brought it upon themselves, or maybe they were just having a detox episode. Maybe they were having the good old-fashioned flu. But you know, and I know that the numbers that are reported related to the deaths from this situation likely came not from the condition itself, but from the protocols that were inflicted upon these individuals. I have had so many healthy Americans send me personal stories of their loved ones that went in and they never came out, and the horrors that they went through, not being able to talk to their loved one, having these medical interventions inflicted on their loved one without their say, in fact, against their explicit instructions. You probably have heard of Scott Shara and the Grace case. I did interview him early on after the very, very tragic situation with his daughter. And he brought a case, and there was a jury. And the jury found, unfortunately, that the doctors and the medical professionals weren't liable for her death, even though they gave her these medications that he explicitly gave no instructions to do so. I think I said that correctly. So there have been plenty of these situations. I had a woman send me a book that she had written about her husband, who is a pastor. Can't think of his name at the moment. If you know this story, please let me know. And she goes into great, horrible detail about what happens and all of these things about the medicines and how it slows down your breathing. So then you're put on the ventilator, and how you don't respond to the ventilator. So then they want to pronounce you as, brain dead. And then before you know it, the hospitals are collecting their money, and you're there to collect your loved one's clothing because that's all that's left. So yes, millions of people did die. How? Well, some were told they had cooties, but they had cancer. They were in hospice. They maybe had pneumonia, or we've heard of people having car accidents, and it was, tallied up to cooties because of the money. So now, why doesn't all that come out? That I would be in favor of. So just a very sad note about the Scott Shara case and how it fits into this story. When I spoke to him, he said that his daughter had a runny nose, and that's why he took her to the hospital. That's what he told me personally. It's shocking to me because I think that was in 2021. I don't think it was 2020. It might have been even a little later. And I thought by then most people knew, don't go to the hospital. I guess he wanted to make sure she would have access to oxygen. There are other ways of doing that than going to the hospital. He also told me that he couldn't oversee that because he was in another hospital for the Omicron variation or something. So it's very, very tragic. And that's an example of people. I can't speak for him or what he was thinking, but in general, people who believed what the media said about these conditions and contagious diseases and started to get so worried and so nervous that they took themselves or their loved ones to a hospital where in a normal time they wouldn't have. They would have stayed home in bed maybe, or done whatever they did when they didn't feel well. And the other, it's just so tragic. So I actually believe this is a type of terrorism that is inflicted upon the public. Terror is literally the threat of a horrible event happening. So I believe the government has terrorized the people through these incessant the media propaganda, because that is to push an agenda. More surveillance, more injections, more government control, sicker people, more dependency on the government. And then these conversations about the government telling us that we have to undergo these interventions. Very, very, very troubling to me. So that's my question for Ron Johnson. What are you going to do this time? I hope that is different. I'm glad that these conversations are getting into the forefront of, the conversation now. Did I just say that? The conversations are happening more and more frequently. And I think the lid is off. I think we're going to see a lot of backtracking. I think we're going to see people apologizing because they didn't know. But I'll leave you with one more question. How is it they didn't know when we all knew? What say you, friends? What say you? I'll take a look at your comments here. We're streaming live. Remember, I've got my free Substack, peggyhall.substack.com. And I want to also take a moment to thank our moderators. They're here every day. We've got Rhonda and Valerie on board. Occasionally we have Olivia and Ava. And I just want to thank them so much for keeping the stream flowing and directing people to resources, and also clarifying information if needed. Cornelia says it's the same excuse, just like in the lockdowns. Yeah, I like to call them shutdowns. That was another way they manipulated us, was with the language. Like a lockdown is for prisoners. Like I wasn't locked down. I had my own key. I could go in and out of my house. So they definitely implored people to stay shut down and businesses shut down because they thought the government was going to come after them. And in some cases they did. Rami says Johnson is playing the good cop role. I really like that comment, Rami, because you just summarized my video in a sentence. It's the good cop, bad cop. And it happens all the time where he can come out and appear to be sympathetic, and somebody comes out and appears, or maybe doesn't appear, but is antagonistic. And that makes us feel as though we are being represented. So I want to thank everybody for being on board. Valerie says they needed a fancier name for a cold or sore throat to induce fear and sell products or push agendas. Again, that just sums it up in a nutshell. Bugs Bunny said it just made me eat more garlic onions. We'll have to do a video on that, on all the home remedies. I don't even know if I can do that on this channel. YouTube does not like people giving any home remedies other than the pharmaceutical remedies. Okay. All right. I'm just looking at your comments here. And okay, Allison says radiation poisoning has the same symptoms. I'm glad you mentioned that. I haven't talked about that too much on this channel, but you're absolutely right. People can have a headache, nausea, feel sick like they have the flu from radiation poisoning. Roberta said, I went in for a shoulder issue. They told me it was a part of COVID. Oh no, that is really, really too much. Soybean says we have many idioms related to the mind's influence on health, such as we're scared to death and I'm sick to my stomach. The body and mind are intrinsically connected to each other. You know, friends, there is something called hypochondria, where people believe that they are sick. They actually believe it. And there's something else called Munchausen's. There's Munchausen's by proxy, which is what your employer was doing. That means a person believes that someone else is ill. It happens sadly with parents that are constantly taking their child to the doctor, or maybe even there have been cases, horrible cases, where the child was harmed under the parent's care, and then the parent would take them to the doctor and be the hero for taking care of them. Or maybe that was a movie I saw, but I believe it happens in real life. It happens with people and their pets, where they constantly are taking their animal to the vet and having all these tests run and so forth. It's like, oh my God, that poor animal can't even speak up for himself or herself. I do want to do a video coming up about, I hope that this conversation about the shots for people is going to extend to pets. So why don't we get a movement to get rid of the rabies? That's what I would like to do. And I'm not talking about the condition, I'm talking about the jab. That is something that I could really get on board with. So I want to do a little more digging with that. And let's tie that in to these conversations right now. So this Munchausen's is when you make yourself sick. It's kind of like hypochondria. And then Munchausen's by proxy is where you do it to someone else. So your doctor, your employer was basically kind of acting like a doctor, telling you that you had to undergo medical interventions to keep your job without knowing anything about your history or your health or anything. And that employer was basically doing Munchausen's by proxy, saying that everyone that was unjabbed was a danger. And they wanted you to participate in a mental illness called hypochondria by undergoing all these nasal assaults frequently. That's ridiculous. That's like going for a chest x-ray every week just to make sure you don't have tuberculosis, or getting a blood draw twice a week to make sure you don't have AIDS. That is a mental illness, and they were all participating in it and trying to force you to do it. So all of that, we still need to keep talking about so people will understand. I really appreciate all your comments here, friends. I will take a look at the rest of them off screen. I'll be back with you tomorrow, and you know where to find me. That's over at peggyhall.substack.com, and right back here with you, 5 p.m. Pacific. That's 8 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Thursday. See you soon.